Chapter 14. The story of Iron John and the wound, the bride, and the wedding.
The only thing left that is from the story of the festival with the golden apples is the wound on my leg that I received. So after I caught the third apple, when I rode away with it, the king's men galloped after me, and one got close enough to cut me with the tip of his sword. As I escaped, the dark horse made such a leap that my helmet fell off and the golden hair was seen. The king's men rode home and told everyone what happened. Now when it comes to a wounded leg, it affects one's ability to stand. It's as if the first wound upon my finger sped up things, but this one slows me down. We could speak of grounding here. In a sense, a wounded leg might give one a better connection to the earth, much like the aspect of a rooted tree. This could lead us to the tree of life, which connects to heaven and to earth. Some old traditions say that no man is an adult until he has become open to the soul and spirit world. And they say that such an opening is done by a wound in the right place, at the right time, in the right company. A wound allows the spirit or soul to enter. So through the little hole of a wound, the immense realm of spirit enters. Here Rumi sums it up perfectly. You've seen a herd of goats going down to the water. The lame and dreamy goat brings up the rear. There are worried faces about that one. But now they're laughing, because look, as they return, that goat is the leader. There are many different kinds of knowing. The lame goat's kindness is a branch that traces back to the roots of presence. Learn from the lame goat and lead the herd home. Dionysus, as we recall, was born from Zeus's thigh, because Dionysus's destiny was to be a man with two mothers. One story says that Hermes saved the unborn boy and sewed him up inside Zeus's thigh. This story has magical thinking in it, but we notice the opening in Zeus's thigh. Notice how in a dark space, a crack is where the light gets in. This sort of thinking is thousands of years old. And if we looked at cave paintings, there's a famous scene of the wounded mammoth, the shaman in trance, and the bird-headed wand, which amount to the study of the wound. When it comes to shamans, we call them wounded healers, because they need to be wounded before they can heal, and even a spear gave Christ a wound in his side before death. It is Dionysus in Greek mythology who is most connected with wounds and woundedness. The Titans, as the myth says, gave Dionysus a mirror when he was an infant as they tore him apart and ate him. Later, he was reconstituted from the heart, which the Titans overlooked. Some of the Greek gods, like Apollo and Zeus, stand for wholeness, radiance, and sun-like integrity, but Dionysus stands for the ecstatic energy that can come from the tearing and being torn. The ecstatic wine comes only if the culture of grapes is torn apart, trampled, and enclosed, much like the process of alchemy. Dionysus is the clump of grapes that hands tore apart in the Greek villages and threw into the wine vat. When men and women were trampling on those grapes, they would sing, "O Dionysus, I did not know, I did not know." We can conclude with the wound that when guided by old men, we become more and more like evergreens and less like spring flowers. We do not die when we are wounded, but took the wound and survived with a scar. Moreover, the leg wound that the king's men gave me have created, according to myth for centuries, a wound inside the male body. No one gets to adulthood without a wound that goes to the core. And as the young man in this story, I could not become a king without a wound. Through this process of initiation and the wound in ritual space, I became double-hearted. Now as a man, I have the physical heart I've always had, but now I have a compassionate heart as well. This is a double heart. So back to the story. The next day, the king's daughter inquired to the gardener about me, and the gardener said, Yes, why he's back at work in the garden. That strange coot went to the festival yesterday and got back late last night. He showed my children 3 golden apples that he had won. The king then called for me, and I appeared with the tarbouche back on my head. Then a moment later, the king's daughter went up to me and pulled it off, for my golden hair fell down for all to see. The beauty was so great that everyone was astounded. The king asked, "Are you the knight who appeared each day at the festival with a different color horse, and at each day caught the golden apple?"
I am, and the apples are here, and if you need more evidence, you can look at the wound that your men gave me after they chased me. What's more, I also am the knight who defeated the enemy.
If you can perform feats of that magnitude, you are obviously not a gardener's boy. Who is your father? Asked the king.
My father is a notable king, and I have a connection to a great deal of gold, as much as I will ever need.
It's clear that I am in debt to you. Whatever I have in my power that will please you, I will give you, said the king.
Well?
I paused as a young man.
I'd suggest that you give me your daughter as my wife.
The king's daughter laughed and said,
I like the way you don't beat around the bush. I already knew that he was no gardener's boy from his golden hair.
And so she walked over and kissed me. As we examine this part in the story, when I was called to the king, I knew that the time of my golden hair had come. It's all right because the holy moment has arrived. Whatever happens in that moment is all right. It is the revelation. With the bride appearing, a connection with the feminine is also right. The young man's walk on the exclusively masculine path has now ended. The wild man, who is a god of nature, has guided a young man's initiation. Iron John's teachings never aim at masculine separation or splitting apart in any way, and soon we will see how it includes the feminine principle. Of course, time moves rather quick in a fable or fairy tale, and now the young boy is a man,
said the white buffalo. But I must ask, who is the wild man named Iron John?
Of course, modern man's connection with the wild man has been disrupted or interrupted for centuries now, and a lot of fear has built up. Rather than looking outside for a wild man, we could look at the traces that remain inside of us. One trace of the wild man is the spontaneity we have preserved from childhood. The wild man has been preserved inside. A man also feels a genuine friendliness towards the wilderness in nature. Thoreau said, "In literature, it is only the wild that attract us. It is the wild man who protects the spotted owl. The wild man is the male protector of the earth." Moreover, when we develop the inner wild man, he keeps track of the wild animals inside of us and warns us when they are liable to become extinct. The wild one in you is that one which is willing to leave the busy life and able to be called away to your calling. The wild man could also represent the positive side of male sexuality. The wild man's sexuality does not feed on the feminine or picture the feminine. It resonates with the hills, clouds, and oceans. The Native American has had much wild man in him, and it comes out of love for ordinary things. As a Chippewa wild woman wrote, "Sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the time I am being carried on great winds across the sky." The wild man is the door to the wilderness in nature, but we could also say that the wild man is nature itself. The same could be said about Hermes, Dionysus, or the planet Mercury. The wild man encourages and amounts to a trust in what is below. The wild man encourages a trust of the lower half of our bodies and our animal ancestors, the earth itself, the treasures of earth, the dead long buried there, and the places we must descend in order to grow. The wild man can only come to full life inside when the man has gone through the serious disciplines suggested by taking the first wound, doing the kitchen work and ashes work, creating a garden, bringing wildflowers to the holy woman, experiencing the warrior, riding the red, the white, and the black horses, learning to create art, and receiving the second heart of compassion. When the descent begins in a person or a nation, we experience a fall, an agreed upon tumble out of respectability and obedience into the dark underbelly of the whale, a dive to the bottom, feeling the weight of a car as it falls on you. This implies that we do not want the ordinary life, and it refers to the possibility of intensity, even though it entails risk of failure, which keeps us from living even-tempered lives, promised to be good servants. There are those of us who would rather touch hell and feel it all than to live comfortably and numb. The aim is not to be the wild man, but to be in touch with the wild man. No sane man in Greece would say, "I want to be Zeus." But in our culture, we find men who try to embody the wild man. Writers as intelligent as Kerouac failed to make the distinction between being and being in touch with the wild man. Trying to be the wild man ends in an early death and confusion for everyone. So when we really think of the wild man, we look and find him in the community within the psyche. The key here is in the community, and it would be foolish to concentrate on him exclusively or the warrior alone. That means the grown man is a whole community within himself. And so, my friend, we are ready to return to the last scene of our story, in which the masculine and feminine come together at last. The regional father and mother are present as well. It is a wedding ceremony, interrupted by a strange event. And so my father and mother were among those who were invited to the wedding, where I was to marry the princess. They were in great joy because they had given up hope that they would ever see me again. While all the guests were sitting at the table for the marriage feast, the music broke off at once when the great doors swung open as a baronial king entered, accompanied by a procession with many great attendants. He walked up to me and embraced me. Now this guest who barged in said, "I am Iron John, who through an enchantment became turned into a wild man. You have freed me from that enchantment. All the treasure that I own will from now on belong to you." As we look back at the story, we realize that the wild man has been slowly ascending, step by step, in harmony with the young man's slow descent. For so long, we've seen the wild man as foresty, wild, and leafy, but all at once, he is related to holy intellect and sun radiance. He is a true king. The energy that has been hidden by water, lying on its back among reeds, becomes a luminous power,
said the white buffalo. So whose story is it? Was it your story, or is this the wild man's story?
It is our story, and our work as men is not only to free ourselves from family cages and collective mindsets, but to release transcendent beings within us from imprisonment and trance. That's what the story says in the end. Everything you need for the journey ahead already lives within you,
said the white buffalo. And so, such initiations do not take place at just one moment, but happen over and over. And so the story is about a young man who descended from the homeland and its courtyard to ashes, from ashes to earth, then to horses under the earth. The wild man passes him on the way up, having ascended from under the water to the courtyard, then to his own sacred spring, then to the master of horses, and finally to the state of kingship. The wild man is part of each man that was once in touch with wilderness and wild animals, that has sunk below the water of the mind, out of sight, below human memory. Covered by hair now, it looks as if the wild man were an animal himself. But tell me, what did the wild man in the wedding symbolize?
The wild man said in effect, "A strong power forced me, by enchantment, to live under the water until a young man appeared, who was ready to undergo the discipline and go through the suffering that you have gone through. Now that you have done that, I can appear as I am, a lord,"
said the white buffalo.